One of the most compelling personal biographies of the 20th century for me is that of Dr. Albert Schweitzer. And today's parable is one of the scripture references that really resonated with him. Albert Schweitzer was a doctor, and he was a professor, and he also was quite an accomplished organist. He was no doubt one of the very most talented people, one of the very most intelligent people who has ever lived. But he was also one of the most compassionate people, and Dr. Schweitzer gave it all up. He said that Africa was like a beggar at the doorstep of the world. And so he saw himself in today's scripture as Dives, the rich man. And so he traded his fame and his fortune and his luxuries and even the basic essentials so that he could start a hospital in Africa. Just as a point of order, just to clarify the words that I'm going to use today, in Jesus' day, Jews believed that there was one place where everyone went when they died. It was called Sheol, the place of the dead. And within Sheol, you found two regions. You had Abraham's bosom, which was a very nice place to be, a place where all of the righteous dead had eternal rest. And then there was the not so good neighborhood, the lake of fire called Gehenna. And for the sake of clarity, I'm just going to say heaven and hell. First, because that is the Christian framework, and secondly, Jesus did not tell us this story so that we would have hints about what the afterlife looks like. Jesus was trying to get a fundamental truth to us. This is, again, a parable and not a literal description. So Jesus tells us a story about two men. The first is Dives, and he is a rich man who has the finest clothes and lives in a mansion, and he eats the best food. His life is so luxurious that he uses bread as a napkin, of fresh peas for every wipe, and then he throws it under the table when he's finished. The second man was a man named Lazarus, a poor man who dressed in rags. And not only is this man poor, he is also sick. The rags, the tattered rags that he wears, do not cover the sores on his body, and so dogs lick at his wounds. He lies at the gate to Dives' house because he is too weak to stand. Lazarus is dying. But somehow Lazarus manages to get to the rich man's gate, hungry, hoping that he might just be given the used napkin bread that falls under the table. This is how it goes day after day. And then the inevitable happens, and the rich man ends up in hell, while the poor men ended up in heaven. Now, that's all that we know about them. What we don't know is how they got this way. And that is really important because we make a lot of assumptions. The first thing that I can tell you about this parable is not a cautionary tale about wealth. And I'm sure that comes as a relief to some of us. We don't know if this rich man got rich by being a shrewd investor, or if he swindled people, or if he made his money the old-fashioned way by inheriting it. We don't know if the rich man was righteous. We don't know much about him, but we can assume that Lazarus would not have been at his gate if he wasn't the least bit charitable. Further, later on in the story, we meet Abraham, who is with Lazarus in heaven, and Abraham was known to be the richest man of his day. So Jesus is not condemning wealth. He certainly does, in other stories, in other passages, he certainly does warn us that wealth can be a barrier to us, that wealth can be bad for us because we worship it. However, if we are good stewards of our wealth, then wealth can be very righteous. Likewise, being poor does not mean that you get a free pass into heaven. But the scriptures do give us insight into what was problematic about this rich man. He was self-absorbed, perhaps even narcissistic. He was unable to notice other people, even a beggar laying on his doorstep. And if you cannot notice a person, you cannot be compassionate toward them. The rich man should have known that this man was dying right on his front porch. I'm sure that his servants would have alerted him to the trouble. Maybe they even had to step over him to go into town. And the rich man did nothing. This is not my problem. I didn't cause this. This is not my responsibility. He probably did something to deserve this. This rich man was the sort of person who saw lonely people and didn't greet them, who passed sick people and did not touch them. Sure, he sometimes threw out the crumbs for the beggars. Well, he sometimes had his servants throw out the crumbs for the beggars and the dogs. The rich man had all of these wonderful clothes, but they were too nice to give away to charity. Probably he gifted his clothes to his servants after he had worn them a few times. And the worst thing about this rich man is that he accepted the status quo. If you ask this rich man, the rich man was rich because that was the way things were. That was the way that things were supposed to be. And this poor man, Lazarus, was poor and sick because that's the way things were supposed to be. This rich man is like the person who is rude to waitstaff because they are waitstaff. The person that doesn't greet a maid at a hotel because she's beneath him. Like the person that ignores the woman who mops up in the office. Dives is like the man walking down the sidewalk who steps around a homeless man drunk on the street. Dives is like the one who tries to avoid interacting with people who look a certain way. He is like the boss that doesn't know a thing about his employees beyond the time that they punch in and the time that they punch out. That's just the way things are, he says. Maybe he might be familiar with the scriptures. Maybe he might misquote Jesus and say, you know, Jesus said, the poor are always with you. So what are we going to do? Even Jesus says there's nothing that we can do about it. And so Dives did nothing to help Lazarus. He decided not to use his wealth as an opportunity to bridge a gap between himself and someone else. And that is why he finds himself in this difficult spot, being tormented and looking up to see Lazarus with Abraham in heaven. And he cried out to Abraham, "Hey, Abraham, have Lazarus bring me a drop of water on his finger. I'm so miserable." And Abraham replies, "There is a fixed gulf between you two now." A fixed gulf, a barrier that cannot be crossed and will not change. Maybe you've been driving and seen a sign that says bridge out, road closed. Maybe you have had experience like I have had and had a GPS send you to cross a bridge that hasn't been there for decades. A fixed gulf. It would be like trying to drive your car from here to England or from an island to the mainland without a ferry. And that is where the rich man found himself, stranded. And Abraham goes on to argue when he asks for someone to go save his family, for someone to go warn them that if they continue on the way that they were, that they would end up suffering. And Abraham says there's nothing that we can do. Even if we were able to go back, they wouldn't listen. And Abraham says, even if someone rose from the dead, it wouldn't change their mind. And certainly, we know people who the one raising from the dead has not even entered onto their radar screen. But there was a time when this rich man could have bridged this gulf. He could have built a bridge for Lazarus through kindness and compassion and justice and respect. But he didn't. And Lazarus did not have the power to bridge that gap himself. I'm sure that he tried at every opportunity to reach out and have a personal encounter with this rich man. And now it's too late. Game over. Maybe you identify with Lazarus. Maybe you are sick and tired and poor. Maybe your life has been hard. Maybe people walk around you and look past you. Maybe you feel like you have had a lot of evil things happen to you. And I think even though we can all feel that way sometimes, I think that we are in reality much more like the rich man. Even if we don't have a lot of money, there are ways that we are all rich. Perhaps we have a decent education. Perhaps we have a lot of friends. And just outside of our gate, there is somebody waiting. Somebody who does not have the blessings that we have. And right now is a time for us to begin working on bridging that gap. Because if we don't do it in this life, it cannot be done in the next. There will be a time when it is too late. We have amazing opportunities in our lives to bridge gaps, whether they are social, economic, justice, personal. And here is what makes me sad. It seems that no matter what we do, things are just getting worse. It seems like our good works are less and less impactful at every turn. What can we do about terrorism in France when the United States is itself being put on travel advisory lists because of our own problems? What can we do about the world's problems when we can hardly affect our own? During the time leading up to the Civil War, a minister named Theodore Parker said this: "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one, and my eye reaches but a little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of my own sight, but I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, the moral arc bends towards justice." There is nothing new about injustice. Not racism or classism or poverty or sexism or ageism or ridiculously senseless terrorism. There's nothing new. This is something that we have been struggling with as a nation throughout its small life. There is nothing new about all of these things. What's new is that every day we have more and more resources to bring an end to these injustices. The $24,000 question is, will we do it? Will we bridge the gap? We find ourselves at a crossroads, personally, as a church, as a nation. We find ourselves at a crossroads, and the way that we thought we were going, there's a sign up ahead. Caution, bridge out. This is a time when we need to choose the road that we will go on, knowing what sacrifices we will have, knowing what risks we will take, and knowing where we want to go.